Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on the third FRA policy-related webinar of 2018. This webinar will provide you with an overview of the results from the midterm elections held earlier this month and what to expect moving forward in terms of the forest products industry supply chain. I'm Tim O'Hara. I'll be one of the presenters today. I'm the manager for the Lake States region and Policy Communications Manager for FRA. And presenting with me today is Pat Rita, FRA's long-term and well-respected government affairs consultant. And before we begin, a couple housekeeping items. Everyone should already be muted and their cameras should be turned off. If they are not, please take the time to do so now. And also, if anyone has questions, please use the chat feature located on the bottom middle of your screen. And your questions will be answered if time permits at the end of this webinar. So with that, we will begin. Pat.
Thanks, Tim. Well, 3 weeks out from the historic midterm elections of 2018, things are still not entirely settled. We know at least one thing: Democrats will have picked up at least 39 seats. There's still one race outstanding, and that's the California 21st, where the Democrat has actually pulled ahead of Republican David Valadao. So very likely the Democrats will have picked up 40 seats. Heading into the election, most analysts had Democrats picking up anywhere from 25 to 40 seats. So clearly this is on the upper range of traditional expectations. And 17 more than the 23 needed for Democrats to take control of the House. So you'll see the graph there, the partisan divides. For you math wizards in the audience, there's 435 seats in the House. 115th Congress is a little off because the numbers are a little off there because there's 3 vacancies. But headed forward into 2019 and the 116th Congress, the partisan breakdown will be 235, likely if that outstanding race goes to the Democrat, 235 Democrats to 200 Republicans.
In the total, 45 seats were flipped one way or the other in the House. 42 seats flipped from Republican to Democrat in 19 states. 3 seats flipped from a D to an R, and two were in Minnesota, and 1 was in Pennsylvania. In Minnesota, both seats were vacant, one by the newly elected governor, Tim Walz, who was a Democrat. And the second district that flipped was a Republican. It was a key race in the nation and one that Trump campaigned for prior to the elections, was District 8, which is in northeastern Minnesota. This seat was long held for a very long time by former Congressman Oberstar. And the 2 main issues causing this historical Democratic seat to flip were primarily issues on mining and forestry. A long-term of the 42 seats that went Democrat, 4 states accounted for half of these to flip. This was New York, California, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. You can see the circles on your map of the regions of the U.S. And if you look at the regions that had the most flips, you look at New England or the Northeast and the Midwest led the way with 23 flips from a Republican to Democrat. The West Coast, California and Washington, 7 flips. California led the way out there with 6 of those seats going from Republican to Democrat. The Southeast had 7 seats turn from R to D, and the Southwest made up the balance, flipping 5 districts. So if you look back historically, this was expected. In the first terms of presidents, the party on the average loses 23 seats. If you go back to Bill Clinton, he lost 54 seats. George Bush, who had a very respectable approval rating of 66% at the time, he actually gained 8 seats. Barack Obama, whose approval rating was 46%, lost 63 seats. And of course, Donald Trump lost 39 seats in total, and his approval rating at the time of the election was 41%.
Moving to the Senate, Republicans netted a total of 2 seats after last night's expected outcome in Mississippi. This 2-seat pickup was largely in the range of what was expected by most political analysts heading into the election. Most felt like, just given the landscape in the Senate, in all the Senate races, the Republicans would likely at least hold their control in the Senate, if not pick up 1 or 2 seats, and that's exactly what happened. So there you see the balance of power in the 115th and what we have moving forward in 2019 in the next session of Congress, 116th Congress.
So in the Senate, a third of the seats are up for election every 2 years. So Republicans had the advantage in 2018 with only 11 seats up for re-election compared to the Democrats, which had an uphill battle to flip the Senate with 24 seats up for re-election. So the Senate, 6 states flipped from the incumbent party. 4 states were Florida, Indiana, Missouri, and North Dakota flipped to Republican, and 2 seats, Arizona and Nevada, flipped to Democrat. And also, which happened last night, the Mississippi runoff is official. So Mississippi maintains a Republican Senate state. So the ratio here still does not give the Republicans the 60-vote majority they need to push legislation through. So obviously, the Senate will be a place where bills may not move forward unless there's bipartisan Senate that takes place. And this is not necessarily bad. There may be poor legislation contrary to FRA goals and objectives from the House that the Senate can still block from moving forward. And historically, if you look back to Bill Clinton, he lost 10 seats in his first midterm election. George Bush gained 2 seats. Obama lost 6 seats. And Trump again gained 2 seats.
Moving on to the governors, Democrats made fairly sizable gains in governors' races across the country, netting a 7-seat pickup. You can see the current balance of power where Republicans hold more than double the number of governor's mansions than compared to the Democrats. Moving forward into 2019, those numbers will be more leveled out. Tim, I'm turning it over to you.
I was on mute. So 36 states had elections for governor this year. Of those 36 races, 7 seats flipped to Democrat and 1 seat went from independent to Republican, and that was in Alaska. Of the seats that flipped, the Midwest really accounted for most of those. Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Kansas accounted for 4 of those states flipping, and Maine, Nevada, and New Mexico were the remainder.
And again, back to the state level, 46 states held state legislative elections. Democrats made modest gains at this level, picking up 6 chambers. But as you can see by the numbers, the state legislative chambers are still largely dominated by Republicans. So what does this all mean moving back to the congressional level? The major changes that we will see will reside largely in the House, just given the change in partisan control. And that means a complete flip in committee chairmanship. So what we'd like to do now is just run down the list of committees in the House that are important to FRA and the association's policy agenda. So let's start with the House Transportation Committee. Peter DeFazio from Oregon represents a district that includes Roseburg and Eugene. He's very familiar with the forest products industry. Some of the issues in his purview will be truck weights. I would not call him a champion of truck weight reform. However, I will say, having worked this issue for many years and met with Mr. DeFazio many times, I would say he's better on this issue than his predecessor, Bill Schuster, who has formerly chaired or currently chairs a committee who is leaving Congress. So there may be an opportunity there on the truck weight issue. I think the other area of opportunity is in transportation infrastructure. Mr. DeFazio has been really messaging hard that this is going to be a central priority of his and the transportation committees in the first quarter and beyond in 2019.
The Natural Resources Committee, the ranking member of the Democrats right now is Representative Grijalva. So the Natural Resources Committee is an important one for us. It has jurisdiction on policies that address energy, wildlife, mining, public lands, Forest Service, and Department of Interior. The BLM, I should say. Some of the recent bills that moved through this committee were the Western Caucus bills that proposed changes to the Endangered Species Act and the delisting of the gray wolf in the lower 48 states. This committee additionally moved the Federal Forest Resilience Act in 2017. In terms of his voting record on FRA-related issues, recent votes on guest workers, Farm Bill, and delisting of the wolf, he voted no. He also serves as a board member to the Center of Biological Diversity. So what's up on your screen now is a kind of a report card that's put together based on bills that are sponsored by the House member and co-sponsors of bills that he also sponsors. So you look at the scale here, it goes from liberal on the left to conservative on the right, and you can see where Jacob, if you click a couple times here. So if you see where Grijalva is, he is ranked as the third most liberal member in the House compared to all other representatives. And typically folks who are this far left don't see eye to eye on forest management issues. So we'll have some work to do in working with the Natural Resource Committee and the leadership there.
Next is the Judiciary Committee, where Jerry Nadler takes over. He is a Democrat representing Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn, not exactly target-rich environments for FRA policy issues. However, guest worker visa reform resides in the Judiciary Committee, and thus FRA is going to have to get to know Mr. Nadler and his committee team intimately over the next few months. So we have our work cut out for us there, and look forward to making that happen. Following up on Judiciary is the Energy and Commerce Committee, also likely to be a challenge with Frank Pallone. He represents a district on the coastal New Jersey area. Actually, one of the key towns is Asbury Park, Bruce Springsteen's hometown. But generally, Mr. Pallone has not been a supporter of the industry. A few years back, the sector was running a boiler MAC relief bill, and he was vehemently opposed to that effort. You can expect that he's not going to look kindly on our carbon neutrality legislative provision. Really, I think the focus of this committee going forward, at least in the short term, is going to be on focusing on the administration's efforts in policy areas in the air and water space. So hearings on Waters of the U.S. rule, on the Affordable Clean Energy rule, and the like. So again, industry, we're going to have our work cut out for us with Mr. Pallone and his team. And I'll leave it at that. Tim?
So the bright spot in the committee changes is Representative Colin Peterson will be chairing the Ag Committee. He's a Democrat from Minnesota. So the Ag Committee is responsible, obviously, for putting together the Farm Bill every 5 years. And of course, the Farm Bill provides funding for forestry conservation programs, as well as provides authorities for Forest Service management. One successful one that we use up here in the Lake States quite a bit has been the Good Neighbor Authority. And the committee also provides oversight to the Department of Agriculture. In terms of recent activity on our issues, Congressman Peterson has co-sponsored the Ag Legal Workforce Act, and we had some language in there for guest worker visas, which was beneficial for us. It did not see the light of day, unfortunately. He also voted yes to pass the listing of the gray wolf in the 48 states, and he was also one of 10 Democrats who voted for the Federal Forest Resilience Act of 2017. So again, he's a very strong supporter. If you look at his report card on the next slide, you'll see Colin Peterson is right of center. He is definitely a conservative Democrat, and he is most often to join bipartisan bills than the other members of the House. So overall, this will be a good change for us. He's very well respected, and we have relationships established with Colin Peterson and his staff.
Moving on to the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal will take over the helm of this very important panel in the House that has jurisdictions over both taxes and trade. I think you can envision a steady diet of hearings on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act next year, as well as the administration's stance on trade policy. So look forward to a lot of action on those two fronts in 2019.
Betty McCollum will be the new chair of the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. She is also a Democrat from Minnesota. This committee is very important that it recommends funding for EPA, the Forest Service, and Department of the Interior. She has publicly requested supplemental appropriations for wildfire suppression across the United States. So that's a positive. And on the flip side, she was the first member of Congress to call for Donald Trump's impeachment. She tends not to vote yes on our issues on immigration, endangered species issues, or forestry issues. Now, if you look at her report card, she is right of Grijalva and left of Peterson. So I think she may be one we can possibly work with, especially on wildfires and Forest Service funding. So she'll need a good deal of education from us and others, but it's a possibility that she may be able to support our issues to some degree.
Moving on to the Senate, I think largely the major changes there thus far feature Senator Grassley from Iowa moving from his current post as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee over to chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. This is an important move as finance handles, again, both issues around income taxes and trade policy. The other big development is the potential move of Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia up to the ranking member slot on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It's anticipated that the current holder of that seat, Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington, may slide over to the ranking member slot on Commerce, as Senator Nelson, who currently holds that spot, was defeated in the election on November 6th. There is some palace intrigue which suggests that Senator Stabenow may leave her post as chairman of the Senate Ag Committee and slide into that ranking member slot on the Senate Energy Committee. But again, the situation is really fluid. But right now, it looks as though Manchin is the odds-on favorite to take that seat, and that would be, I think, a good thing for us, just in terms of, he's definitely West Virginia is a coal state, but he is very familiar with issues around forest products and particularly biomass energy. So what's next? Right now, we're in the midst of the lame duck session, which is that period of time after the election and before Christmas in the second year of a two-year congressional session. And there's a couple of must-pass ducks on the pond, if you will, that are out there that need action. And one is government funding. The current measure that funds our government expires after December 7th. And there's a couple of issues in play that will be dealt with in that package, likely. One is our biomass carbon neutral directive. I think that definitely that will be reauthorized for at least another year through 2019. The entire forest products industry has been lobbying for language in the appropriations package that would lend this provision, which is currently on the books, permanence. In other words, fiscal years not only through 2019, but every fiscal year thereafter. So I think that's probably a tall hill to climb at this point, but we will definitely be renewed at least through 2019. The other issue area that may see some action is guest worker visa reform. There's very favorable language that's kind of bouncing around the halls of Congress that would make some major improvements in both H-2B and also H-2A guest worker visa programs. And on the H-2A front, there's a carve in for forestry workers. So we haven't seen final language yet, but we remain optimistic that that may hitch a ride on any government funding package that comes together. And of course, the Farm Bill, we're waiting with bated breath here. A deal is evidently imminent, according to Senate Ag Committee Chairman Pat Roberts, but the Conference Committee has been negotiating over the last several weeks to come to a final agreement on a conference report. There's a number of provisions in play for the forest product sector, including provisions that would promote wood in taller structures, wood building materials in taller structures. There's provisions that would promote the use of biomass energy that's fueled from sawmill residuals to address the mounting sawmill residual crisis that is being encountered by many sawmills throughout the country. And also what has been holding up a final deal on the Farm Bill, some very favorable federal forest management reform provisions that I doubt will ultimately get into the final package. Maybe one or two of them may, but are nonetheless taking center stage. So keep your eyes out for a final deal emerging here in the next hours or days. So moving forward into the 116th Congress, the first order of business will be for the parties to elect their leaders. And really, we're going to focus on the House here, as that's where we have the change in control. In fact, House Democrats are meeting all day today in a closed-door session to come together on or come to agreement on a slate to put forward to the full House on January 3rd of next year. What's likely to come out as the slate when the white smoke appears is Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn as Speaker, Majority Leader, and Whip, respectively. No one has challenged the Pelosi team at this point going into the caucus, and so that's what's likely going to come out. And again, a vote will occur before the full House on January 3rd. And keep in mind, the Pelosi team has to garner 218 votes in the House, which, you know, you could really envision a scenario where you get enough Democrat defections. Many of these members ran against Pelosi to win their seats, enough defections to take her team down. But, you know, looking at the situation on November 28th, it seems increasingly unlikely, and I think that's going to be your Democrat leaders moving forward in the 116th. On the Republican side, it will be Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise as your minority leader and minority whip, respectively. You know, looking forward to next year, I think it's safe to say that you'll see a lot of administrative officials spending a whole lot of their time on the House side of Capitol Hill, appearing before committees with jurisdiction over their agencies. I believe that FRA will likely be playing defense on a number of issues of interest to the association, namely in the environmental and energy space. I'm thinking biomass, water quality, as I mentioned earlier, and also the Endangered Species Act. I think the one important variable here is the Senate, and the magic number in the Senate continues to be 60, which is the votes needed to pass any measure through the upper chamber, which is purposely a high hurdle, and it really forces a bipartisan approach to policymaking. And so the bottom line here, as it's been for many Congresses, is that, you know, if you get a raft of negative partisan proposals passing the House, the Senate really serves as a stopper to ultimate enactment of those measures.
So the take-home messages, and by the way, I for one am very happy the forestry issues are holding up the Farm Bill. There's 6 forest reforms in there, the House version, and like Pat mentioned, the negotiations probably won't get them all, but we should see maybe 1 or 2 of those get approved in the final Farm Bill. So the major takeaways again, you know, the 116th Congress will make it very difficult to move forestry legislation or FRA issues in general. and this is no different than what's occurring now, where favorable legislation is being passed by the House and sent on to the Senate, and without the 60 votes to move things, they just kind of sit in the Senate and do not move forward. So depending on the legislation, this could be bad or it could be good. So we probably will get some unfavorable legislation coming out of the House, moving to the Senate, and again, without bipartisanship of the Senate, it's not going to move on. We'll also see an increase focus on climate change and likely legislation from the House on emissions and more focus on green energy. And as Pat has mentioned, there are surprises out there. Agreement on the Farm Bill may be reached this week, and included in that, hopefully, there are some Forest Service authorities, and there may be some beneficial items also to come out of the appropriations, which will be reviewed on December 7th, so real shortly. So with that, we'll move on, and if you have any questions, again, the chat box on the middle bottom of your screen, you may type questions there. We have about 5 minutes remaining on the webinar. Any questions, Jacob?
There don't appear to be, Tim.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll move on. And again, thank you for participating. I hope this was useful. And it should be an exciting next year in terms of politics. And the presidential campaigning has probably already started, that most of you are aware. So next 2 years will likely be exciting. So again, thank you, and we'll sign off now.